The desert wind blew through the dry canyons, carrying with it the faint smell of dust and iron. A girl walked slowly along the edge of a forgotten trail, her steps light, almost afraid to leave a mark. Her name was Naya, an Apache girl who had once known freedom in the wide lands of her people, but that was before the mines took her. For years she had lived in darkness, working among rough men and endless stone, never seeing the sun for more than a few minutes a day. The mine had taken her laughter, her voice, and her hope. She didn't even remember what it felt like to smile. When she escaped, she didn't know where to go. Her village was gone, burned long ago during the wars. The world had changed, and she was a ghost walking in it. For days she wandered, weak and half-starved, until she found herself near a small town on the edge of the Arizona plains. She didn't dare go close to people. She hid among rocks, drank from a creek, and slept beneath a broken cart left to rot. She had forgotten what kindness looked like. That was when Eli Carter, a cowboy with a quiet heart and weathered eyes, saw her. He had been riding home from a cattle drive, dust covering his coat and hat. He noticed a thin figure crouched near the water, trying to catch fish with her bare hands. At first he thought it was a child, but when she turned he saw a young woman, thin as bone, face covered in dirt, eyes sharp yet empty. She flinched at the sound of his horse and stepped back as if expecting harm. Eli stopped his horse far enough not to scare her more. He didn't speak at first. He simply took a small loaf of bread from his saddlebag and placed it on a flat rock between them. Naya stared at the bread, then at him. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to ask something but couldn't. Eli just nodded and said softly, "It's all right. You can take it." His voice was calm, slow, like a man speaking to a wild bird. She waited until he turned his back before she moved forward and grabbed it, eating with quiet desperation. Eli pretended not to see. He didn't ask who she was or where she came from. He just waited, letting her finish. After a while, he spoke again. "You can come to my ranch. There's food, a bed, and water to clean up. No one will bother you there." Naya didn't answer. She shook her head and stepped back. Trust wasn't something she could give easily. But when the wind picked up and she saw the sky turning red with dust, she hesitated. Eli noticed. He pointed toward a hill where a small wooden house stood in the distance. "That's my place," he said. "You can rest there tonight. After that, you can go wherever you want." Naya looked at the house, then at him. Something in his eyes made her believe he meant no harm. So she followed, slowly, carefully, always a few steps behind his horse. When they reached the ranch, she stood by the fence, looking around as if she'd entered another world. The horses watched her curiously. The chickens scattered when she walked past. Everything felt strange, peaceful but unreal. Eli dismounted, tied his horse, and opened the door. "Come in," he said quietly. "No one else lives here." Inside, the house smelled of old wood and coffee. There was a small fire burning and a pot on the stove. Eli poured some soup into a bowl and handed it to her. Naya's hands shook as she took it. She looked at the spoon like she'd forgotten how to use it. He didn't say a word. He sat across from her, pretending to fix a piece of rope while she ate in silence. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the faint wind outside. After eating, Naya fell asleep in a chair, too tired to move. Eli covered her with his old coat and let her rest. That night, as he sat on the porch, he wondered who she was and what she'd been through. There were scars on her wrists and fear in her eyes that no normal life could explain. He didn't need to know the details to understand she'd seen too much pain. So he made a quiet promise to himself. As long as she was under his roof, no one would hurt her again. The next morning, when Naya woke up, she panicked. She didn't remember where she was. The warmth, the bed, the smell of food, it all felt wrong, too gentle. Eli was outside feeding the horses. When he saw her standing by the door, ready to run, he smiled and said, "If you leave, that's fine. But breakfast is almost ready." He said it like he was talking to an old friend. Something in his tone made her stop. She sat back down slowly. Days passed, and Naya began to find small pieces of peace. She helped Eli feed the animals, cleaned the barn, and learned to ride a horse again. The first time she touched the reins, her hands trembled. Eli placed his hand over hers, steady and calm. "The horse can feel your fear," he said softly. "But if you're gentle, it'll trust you." That day, for the first time in years, she felt the wind in her hair and the sun on her face without fear. She rode slowly at first, then faster, until a small laugh escaped her lips. Eli heard it and smiled quietly. It was the first sound of joy he'd ever heard from her. Still, some nights she woke up screaming. She'd run to the barn and hide, shaking in the dark. Eli never forced her to talk. He'd just bring her a lantern and sit nearby, humming an old tune until she calmed down. One night when the moon was bright, she finally spoke. Her voice was small and broken. She told him how her village had been taken, how she'd been made to work in the mine, digging and carrying stones until her body gave up. Eli listened without interrupting. He didn't ask for details. He just said, "You're safe now. You don't have to go back there." Naya didn't cry that night. She just looked at the horizon, her eyes tired but softer. From that moment, something inside her began to change. She started helping Eli more, planting vegetables, fixing fences, and even smiling sometimes. The ranch became a place of quiet healing. Two lonely souls sharing silence that didn't hurt anymore. One afternoon, a group of men from town came by looking for a missing worker. Eli told them he hadn't seen anyone. Naya watched from inside, her heart pounding, afraid they might recognize her. Eli stood firm, his voice calm but strong. "Ain't nobody here but me," he said. When the men left, Naya looked at him through the window. She realized he had risked himself for her without asking for anything in return. That night, she placed a small carved stone on his table, a piece she had kept hidden since her childhood. It was her way of saying thank you. Eli didn't say much, but when he found the stone, he smiled and kept it in his pocket. From that day on, they worked side by side like family. Naya's eyes no longer looked empty. They carried quiet strength. The land that once frightened her now felt like home. For the first time in years, she believed in tomorrow. But as peace settled in, the past had its way of returning. One morning, a stranger rode into town asking questions about a girl who had escaped from the mines. Eli heard about it from a shopkeeper and knew trouble might come soon. He didn't tell Naya right away. He just looked at her that evening as she sat by the fire, braiding a horse's mane, and thought about how much she had changed. He couldn't let anyone take that away, and as the sun set behind the hills, he knew that if the past came knocking, he'd stand between her and the world, no matter what it cost him. The next morning, the sky was painted gold and the ranch looked peaceful as always. Naya was brushing one of the horses near the fence, humming softly to herself, while Eli fixed the gate with a hammer and some rope. Everything seemed calm, but Eli's mind was heavy. The stranger's words from the town echoed in his head. A man had been asking about an escaped Apache worker, said she had stolen something valuable from the mine. Eli didn't believe a word of it. He had seen the truth in Naya's eyes. Whatever had happened there, she didn't owe anyone anything. Still, he knew the man would come. He didn't tell her that morning. He didn't want to see fear in her face again. Instead, he tried to keep things normal. They ate breakfast together, talked about the horses, and worked on the corral fence. But every sound of hooves in the distance made Eli lift his head. Around noon, he finally saw dust rising from the trail, a single rider approaching. His heart tightened. Naya noticed the change in his expression. "Someone coming?" she asked quietly. Eli nodded. "Maybe someone from town," he said, trying to sound casual. But his hand rested near his side where he kept his old revolver, not to harm, just in case he needed to warn. The rider drew closer, a tall man with a brown coat, hat low, and a sharp face that carried the look of someone used to giving orders. He stopped near the gate and called out, "I'm looking for a girl. Apache girl. She ran away from the silver mine up north." Eli stayed calm. "You're a long way from that mine," he said, stepping forward. "No girls around here." The man's eyes narrowed. "You sure? Folks in town said you might have taken in someone. Thin girl, dark hair, quiet." His voice was smooth, but there was something cold behind it. Naya froze where she stood near the barn, her heart racing. Eli caught the movement from the corner of his eye and without turning said firmly, "Ain't no one here like that." The man studied Eli for a moment, then smiled in a way that wasn't friendly. "If you do see her," he said, "you best let me know. The mine owners don't like losing property." The word made Eli's jaw tighten. He didn't answer. The man tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode off slowly as if to show he wasn't done yet. Naya watched him disappear down the road, her hands shaking. Eli walked back to her quietly. "He's gone for now," he said. She nodded, eyes wide with worry. "They'll come again," she whispered. "They always come." Eli rested his hand gently on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready. You ain't alone anymore." His voice was steady, full of quiet strength. That night, Naya couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moonlight fall over the empty plains. Memories from the mine kept coming back. The sound of pickaxes, the echo of footsteps, the cold hunger that never left. But now there was something new inside her, a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. She looked toward the small cabin where Eli slept and whispered softly, "Thank you." The next few days were quiet. Naya helped mend fences, fed the animals, and even began painting old wooden boards to fix the barn walls. Eli noticed how her hands had stopped trembling when she worked. There was peace in her movements now. She laughed sometimes, though softly, like she was still testing what it felt like. Eli would smile every time he heard it, but the peace didn't last long. One afternoon, while Eli was in town buying supplies, Naya saw dust rising again from the road. More riders this time. Her heart sank. She knew it had to be them. She ran inside the house, her mind racing. She wanted to hide, but part of her refused to run again. She had spent too long being afraid. She stood by the door, breathing fast, waiting. 3 men rode up to the ranch, their boots heavy with dust. The man from before was among them. He dismounted and looked around. "Carter," he shouted. "We're just here to ask a few questions." Naya didn't move. She stayed inside, remembering Eli's calm voice. "If they come, stay still," he had said. "Don't let fear make choices for you." After a few minutes, the men turned their horses toward the barn. That's when Eli appeared on the ridge, his horse galloping fast. He rode down the slope and stopped near the fence. His voice carried across the wind. "You boys lost something?" The man in the brown coat smiled thinly. "Just doing our duty. Heard the girl might be here." Eli looked straight at him. "You heard wrong." His tone was flat, steady. The man dismounted again, walking closer. "You're hiding her, aren't you? You think she belongs here with you? She's a runaway." Eli didn't flinch. "She's a free woman," he said. "And this is private land. You'd best leave." The man laughed softly. "You got no right to stand in the way of business." Eli's eyes hardened, though his voice stayed calm. "Then you don't know me well enough to test my patience." The silence stretched. Even the horses grew still. Finally, the man spat on the ground and said, "Fine, but if she shows her face in town, the law'll take her." He mounted his horse and signaled the others. The men turned and rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind. Eli stayed there until they were gone, then slowly walked back toward the house. Naya was standing by the door, trembling, tears running silently down her face. He nodded at her gently. "It's over," he said. "They won't bother you again." She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stepped forward and did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and held his hand. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. Eli looked down at her and saw something new in her eyes. Trust. In the days that followed, Naya's spirit began to bloom like spring after a long winter. She learned to play guitar from Eli, who had an old instrument sitting in a corner, and soon her soft songs filled the evenings. She planted flowers near the porch, painted the barn doors blue, and started writing in a small journal Eli gave her. Every page held bits of her story, pain, hope, and quiet gratitude. One evening, while they sat by the fire, Eli said softly, "You ever think of going back to your people? Maybe someone's still out there." Naya looked at the flames and shook her head. "My people are gone," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But maybe this is where I'm meant to be now." Eli nodded, not as a man who claimed ownership, but as someone who understood. He had lived alone for years, drifting through empty days until she arrived and brought warmth back into his life. Now they were 2 souls who had found something close to peace. Not because they had forgotten the past, but because they had survived it together. Seasons passed and the ranch flourished. Naya became stronger, her laughter brighter, her eyes filled with confidence. People in town started to notice her, the quiet Apache woman who could calm any horse and heal wounded animals with a touch. Some called her the Desert Dove. Children came to the ranch to hear her stories, and travelers often stopped by just to taste her cooking and listen to her soft singing in the evenings. Eli grew older, his hair turning gray, but his heart felt lighter than ever. Every morning he'd wake up to the sight of Naya walking through the fields, her long braids shining in the sunlight. He often thought about the first time he saw her, scared, alone, and broken, and how far she had come. Years later, when Eli passed away peacefully one summer night, Naya sat beside him until dawn. She placed the same small carved stone she had once given him long ago on his chest, whispering, You gave me back my life." After that day, she took care of the ranch alone, keeping it just as he had left it. People said that every evening, when the sun dipped low over the hills, a figure could be seen standing on the porch, watching the horizon. The same Apache girl who had once been a slave but became a symbol of freedom. She had found peace not through revenge, but through kindness and courage. And though the world had forgotten her name, the wind still carried her story. The girl who found her life again because one cowboy chose compassion over judgment. And in that quiet corner of the desert, their story lived on forever, a reminder that sometimes healing begins with a single act of kindness.